Neither Israel nor the West is innocent by any means. They have plenty of blood on their hands too, but there is a categorical difference here. I am also not equating Hamas and Islamic terrorism with the plight of individual Palestinians for self-determination and a better standard of living. But what I am saying is that if you think that seeking out young people and children and grandmas is slaughter, and then running back to hide behind your own civilians to use their deaths in the inevitable retaliation to try to garner some sympathy, that this is in any way justifiable, then the real tragedy is that you become so intellectually and morally desensitized that you betray your own humanity. There is a lot of convoluted moral posturing surrounding the recent events in Israel and the Palestinian territories. There are those in the West, like the Chicago chapter of BLM, who seem to think it trendy and hip to glorify terrorism as an appropriate rule of engagement. This is not that surprising. These people who imagine themselves postmodern anti-colonial Marxists, fueled by an introductory course in philosophy given by certain professors who seem devoid of any real depth of morality, who decry the use of words as literal violence and yet are in actual support of actual violence, who have the intellectual and moral aptitude of a field mouse and the self-reflection capabilities of a doorknob. Now, don't get me wrong, I do understand this desire for social change, for freedom for the oppressed. I too watch V for Vendetta with a certain euphoria, but my God, learn to think. Don't be so easily taken in by such outstandingly stupid ideologies. Aside from these are some more serious intellectuals who have long been critical of Israel and the West more generally. I have also critiqued the West, in fact, I do it all the time, but precisely because we hold the West to a different standard. Any hope for the survival of humanity hinges on the survival of the West, particularly Western values. Any true intellectual who critiques the West does so precisely to the extent it acts in contradiction of its own ideals, to the extent that it stands in the way of the flowering of its own ideals. We might call them universal ideals because I know, and you know, that we both actually hold these ideals. But there are those who do not share our values, either because their conscience has been seared or because it has not yet been developed. Minds evolve. It was not long ago we would command slaves or hang people in the streets, but we have developed a distaste for it. That is not so for everywhere around the world. When Hamas slaughters teenagers in the music festival and murders a grandma and then uploads it to her Facebook for her family to see, when they rape and torture and execute hostages, they are acting in accordance with their values. Israel sends out warnings to the Palestinians to evacuate, and Hamas tells them to stay. Hamas hides among civilians because they know it could cause Israel to be more cautious. On the other hand, Hamas intentionally seeks out Israeli civilians. That's a fundamental difference in values. If any Israeli soldier was to act nearly as barbarically as Hamas, they would immediately be imprisoned by Israel. Hamas and its supporters, on the other hand, cheer and celebrate in the workings of their brutality. There is absolutely no moral equivalence here. If you are still confused, here's a simple way to help you think of it. I know, and you know I know you know, that it would be 1,000 times better to fall into the hands of the IDF as a young Palestinian woman than to fall into the hands of Hamas as a young Israeli woman. Yes, we can criticize Israel for its political oppression and its treatment of Palestinians, though it's a tall order to be surrounded by neighbors who seek your annihilation while tasked with keeping law and order. Yes, we can criticize Israel for not working harder to find a solution, even though Hamas categorically rejects any attempt to coexist with Israel. Yes, we can criticize Israel for not being cautious enough, for being too aggressive in its retaliation against terrorist attacks, for the unfolding humanitarian crisis that we see, even though Hamas purposefully hides among civilians and tries to keep them from fleeing. But we can criticize Israel precisely because Israelis share our values.